The beer in your hand may look harmless, but the truth hiding behind certain brands has never been more dangerous for everyday drinkers. We trust the crisp label, the cold bottle, the clean pour. Yet some of the biggest names on the shelf have faced problems that never make it into the commercials. Recalls residue findings, packaging flaws, and trust-breaking incidents that should make anyone pause. And that is why today we're pulling the curtain back on 7 beer brands you should never drink. Not because of rumor or fear, but because each one carries a documented moment where the story inside the bottle didn't match the promise on the outside. Some dealt with glass fragments, some showed traces of farm chemicals, some faced public confidence shocks that revealed how fragile the brewing chain really is. This video isn't here to scare you. It's here to give you the clarity the industry rarely volunteers. Once you understand how these issues appear and how quietly they can hide, choosing a safer beer becomes less of a gamble and far more of a conscious choice. 1. Newcastle Brown Ale. The story of Newcastle Brown Ale begins with something most drinkers never imagine: a bottle that looks perfect on the shelf, but carries a flaw no one can see. In early 2025, certain batches of this familiar pub beer were pulled back from stores after safety checks showed they could contain small glass fragments. Not dust, not harmless specks. Actual slivers that might blend into the dark amber the moment you pour it. It's the kind of recall that rarely reaches the average shopper. You walk past the display. You see the classic brown label. You think of old pubs, wooden tables, and a beer that feels steady and simple. But inside a small slice of production, something went wrong long before the bottle ever met your hand. The issue wasn't in the brewing, it wasn't in the hops or the yeast. It lived inside the glass itself, in the part of the process we never question, because we assume the bottle is always the safest thing in the room. What made this case stand out was how the problem was discovered. It didn't start with complaints from drinkers. It surfaced during internal inspections, the kind of routine quality sweep that happens quietly behind factory walls. Engineers noticed that certain bottles from a specific run carried a weakness in the glass that could crack or flake under pressure. Only a fraction of production showed signs of it, but the defect was serious enough that regulators issued a public recall notice instructing consumers to check their batch codes and return any matching bottles. That moment says something important about modern beer. Most people picture danger coming from the liquid, not the container. We worry about taste, freshness, maybe even ingredients. But the bottle, it's supposed to be the one part we never question. Yet here the bottle became the most unpredictable piece of the entire chain. And because Newcastle is a darker beer, anything inside would have been nearly impossible to spot once it hit the glass. Foam forms, bubbles rise, the color deepens, and whatever is in there disappears under the surface. For a lot of longtime fans, this recall raised an uncomfortable question. How often do problems like this go unseen? The truth is, packaging issues in the beverage world happen more than shoppers realize, but only a few ever reach public attention. Factories deal with pressure variations, sudden shifts in temperature, and long mechanical lines, where one change can create a ripple that no one notices until a routine audit catches it. And when that ripple involves glass, companies don't gamble, they pull the product, even if only a tiny percentage is affected. One drinker in the recall region later mentioned how he had bought a 6-pack for a quiet weekend and had no idea it was part of the flagged batch until a friend sent him the alert. He said he checked every bottle twice. He didn't see anything unusual, but the thought stayed with him. The flaw was invisible, and that made it feel more real. That is the lesson. Newcastle Brown Ale didn't set out to deceive anyone. The brand didn't change its recipe or cut corners on flavor. But the weakest link wasn't the beer. It was the container built to carry it. And that is what this list is really about. The gaps we never look at because we assume they're covered. The recall was limited. The issue was corrected. But the takeaway remains: sometimes the danger isn't in the drink. It's in the silence between the factory and your table. To a Corona Extra. Corona Extra has always looked like the safest choice in the cooler. The clear bottle, the pale gold color, the slice of lime people push into the neck, as if that simple ritual could seal in purity. It sells the feeling of lightness, the kind of beer you reach for when you want something gentle, clean, and easy on the body. Then the other side of its story comes in, and that easy feeling disappears almost immediately. For years, Corona's biggest advantage was that bright, transparent bottle. It made the beer look honest. It let sunlight pass straight through. It gave drinkers a sense that nothing was hiding. But that same bottle has been connected to recalls where small glass particles were found in select runs. You could hold a bottle up to the sky and still never see what might be sitting near the bottom. The flaw wasn't dramatic. But it was serious enough for companies to pull product issue alerts and ask customers to check codes. When the container is unstable, the whole image of clean refreshment cracks with it. The trouble didn't stop with packaging. Independent consumer group testing also found trace levels of glyphosate, the same farm chemical used heavily in grain production, in sampled batches of Corona. These amounts were not high enough to break any regulatory limit, but they shattered the illusion that a soft light beer automatically means a safe one. Glyphosate's presence in anything meant for daily consumption raises questions most drinkers never think to ask. Beer is supposed to be simple, yet here it carried the residue of an agricultural system that reaches far beyond the brewery. To understand why this matters, imagine a simple weekend scene. A group of friends gather around a backyard grill. Someone reaches into the cooler and pulls out a Corona because it feels mild and predictable. The cap twists off. The bottle sweats in the heat. The drink goes down easily, but an hour later the person feels a tight headache sitting behind the eyes and a sharp burn settling in the stomach. They blame the weather or the food or maybe drinking too quickly. They don't consider the bottle the residue or the brewing chain that moves quietly behind the label. Only later scrolling online they notice that bottles from the same production window were part of a recall they never heard about. That is how Corona's real problem affects people, not through immediate crisis but through subtle aftermath. A sudden heaviness, a sour stomach, a sense that something is off even when the beer tasted clean. When consumers feel these effects, they rarely trace it back to the bottle or the grain field. They attribute it to age stress or dehydration. Yet the combination of a fragile glass container and agricultural residue tells a different story. It shows how consequences can hide inside something that seems harmless. Corona's marketing has always leaned on simplicity: beaches, bright skies, a quiet moment at the end of the day. But the truth underneath is more complicated. Clear glass leaves beer exposed to light, which can speed up chemical reactions that create off flavors and irritation. Grain treated with heavy herbicides can introduce trace residue into the final product. And a recall tied to glass particles reminds drinkers that even the container can turn into a risk before the beer ever reaches their lips. What this segment reveals is not scandal, it is vulnerability. A drink built on the idea of lightness now carries questions about how it behaves inside the body. The risk is not loud. It does not shout. It arrives quietly in the form of discomfort that lingers longer than the taste. And once you see that the bottle never feels as simple again. 3 Sierra Nevada. How does a brewery known for discipline and craft pride end up recalling bottles for glass risks no drinker could ever see coming? Sierra Nevada has always looked untouchable. Copper kettles, slow brewing, controlled fermentation. The kind of brand people point to when they want proof that real beer still exists. But a recall across dozens of states forced a harder look at the system behind the label, a system far more complex, crowded, and pressured than the calm green branding suggests. Specifically, 8 years ago in January 2017, Sierra Nevada recalled select 12-ounce bottles from its Mills River, North Carolina facility after internal checks showed certain batches across 36 states could shed small pieces of glass. But recalls like this don't happen because one worker wasn't paying attention. They happen because entire processes feel the force of modern competition. Craft beer used to be slow. Then the market exploded. Demand grew. Shelf space became a battlefield. Once a brand gets national placement, the clock speeds up. Batches must move. Output must rise. And suppliers must meet the same deadlines the brewery faces. This is where the real pressure builds. Inside a glass plant trying to keep pace, kilns run hotter and longer. Machines push molds faster. A line that once tolerated short pauses loses those breaks as orders stack up. A minor defect, a thin seam, a stressed ridge, a weak heel can slip through if the plant pushes one shift harder than usual. From there, the bottles climb into trucks, rattle across states, and reach a filling line operating under its own time pressure. Cold beer meets warm glass. Pressure shifts. Weak points flex before they fail. Sierra Nevada's quality control is stronger than most, but even strong teams strain when cycles tighten. When multiple varieties line up on the same equipment. When distributors want faster loadouts. When production surges during holiday seasons. A QC inspector scanning a long chain can miss a fracture no wider than a pen stroke. And that is how the recall was born, not through carelessness, but through the invisible math of scale. The cost of national presence is speed. And speed, even with good intentions, always pulls on the weakest link. Now put yourself in the drinker's place. Late at night. A chilled Sierra Nevada on the counter. The bottle sweats as it warms in your hand. You pour a clean amber stream into a tall glass, confident you picked something careful and reliable. You never picture the glass traveling through furnaces and conveyors pushed past comfort. You never imagine a supplier trying to meet monthly quotas. One slip upstream and the image of craft certainty becomes shakier than it looks. The lesson isn't that Sierra Nevada failed as a brewer. The lesson is that no brewery, not even the careful ones, is protected from the realities of volume deadlines and industrial-scale supply chains. Quality isn't a single decision. It's a chain of hundreds, and every link has to hold. As food safety expert Dr. Benjamin Chapman of North Carolina State University puts it, in any high-volume beverage chain, one weak supplier can undo 10 strong steps. For Samuel Adams, I drank Sam Adams for 20 years because I trusted it. Now I don't know what's inside the bottle anymore. Few lines capture the shock of a loyal drinker better than this one. It isn't anger, it isn't an outrage. It's the quiet, sinking feeling of realizing the beer you counted on may not have been as steady as you believed. For decades, Samuel Adams earned that trust the honest way. Before craft beer became a trend, before supermarkets overflowed with new labels, this was the brand people reached for when they wanted something better than a basic lager. It promised clean recipes. It promised consistency across states. It promised reliability at a time when craft still meant small-scale, careful, and personal. Many drinkers embraced it as the default choice, the beer for family gatherings, long weekends, and backyard breaks after mowing the lawn. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't trying to be exotic. It simply felt dependable. But that sense of safety cracked when the company announced a recall tied to a defective glass supplier. The issue didn't come from the brewing side. It wasn't about hops, yeast, or grain. It was the bottle, the one part of the experience most people assume is always safe. Certain 12-ounce bottles were found to have micro defects that could break off under pressure, sending small pieces into the drink without any warning. And just like that, the image of the trustworthy, all-American craft pioneer went from reassuring to uncertain. For longtime buyers, the emotional impact ran deeper than the technical flaw itself. A defect in the liquid is one thing people can accept a bad batch or a change in flavor. But a defect in the container, that's a different kind of violation. It raises questions about how long the problem existed, how many bottles moved through shelves unnoticed, and whether small signals in the past were brushed aside. Picture one of those drinkers. A middle-aged man home after a long shift opens his fridge and grabs the same Sam Adams he's been buying for years. He doesn't think twice about it. He pours it into a glass, sits in his worn-out chair, and lets the familiar taste settle in. But a few minutes later, he feels a tightness spreading across his stomach, a feeling he's noticed on and off for months, but never really examined. Maybe it was stress. Maybe age. Maybe he drank too fast. He never once thought the bottle itself could be part of the problem. Only after hearing about the recall does everything replay in his mind with new weight. This is the kind of moment that brands rarely see, but consumers feel deeply. When trust is shaken, it isn't loud. It doesn't explode like a scandal. It spreads slowly, like doubt creeping into a routine. You start looking at the bottle a second longer. You start checking the cap, the neck, the label code. You wonder whether the thing you thought was safe might have been silently changing over time. And once that feeling sets in, loyalty doesn't disappear, it erodes. The systemic reasons behind the recall only add to the discomfort. Samuel Adams is no longer a regional craft operation, it's a national engine. Volume matters, timing matters. Retail shelves move fast, glass plants supply multiple regions at once, and one defect can travel through warehouses, trucks, and stores long before the brewery realizes anything is wrong. That's the cost of scale. The further a brand reaches, the more it depends on long chains of partners, and every link introduces its own risks. But we can't end with fear, it needs clarity. The reality is simple: no brand, no matter how beloved, is immune to the pressure of modern production. So the advice is grounded and calm. Choose beers with shorter distribution paths. Check batch codes when recalls appear. Rotate brands instead of holding onto one name out of habit. And remember that trust is not blind. It is built by staying aware of how your choices move through the world before they reach your glass. 5 Coors Light. Coors Light has always relied on one promise: the colder it looks, the cleaner it feels. The mountains turn blue. The can frosts over. Your hand chills the second you pick it up. It sells the idea of purity without ever asking you to think about flavor. But the more you pay attention, the more that cold glow begins to hide. For years now, waves of customers have reported strange odors, metallic bitterness, and off-batches problems linked to filtration, inconsistencies, and defects in the lining of certain cans. Those aren't dramatic issues. They don't show up as big headlines. But they're the kind of quiet problems that change how a beer tastes sip by sip. Imagine drinking it yourself. You crack the can open and that first breath hits you with something flat, not grain, not hops, but a faint metallic twang. The beer pours almost colorless, a pale silver yellow that looks more like watered-down lemonade than lager. The first sip is cold enough to numb the tongue, but the second begins to reveal more. The body feels thin, almost slippery. The flavor slips away before you swallow. And once the beer warms just a little in your hand, a sour edge creeps in something sharp and unfamiliar. Even the aroma shifts into a faint mustiness like wet cardboard drying in the sun. These are not isolated impressions. Online threads are filled with similar notes: chemical smell, tin taste, strange batches, weird sour finish. Something is off with the new cans. Some drinkers say certain packs taste normal, while others taste like a different beer entirely. That's not random chance, that's inconsistency at production scale. You can see the difference with real beer. A proper lager, even a simple one, has grain warmth underneath the cold. You can smell the malt without trying. The color has depth, a honey yellow, a soft amber glow, not a hint of silver washed out by overfiltration. The bitterness is gentle but present. The bubbles are tighter, steadier. When it warms slightly, the aroma opens up instead of collapsing into sourness. Real beer has weight. It has shape. It doesn't disappear the moment it hits the tongue. So, how did Coors Light drift this far? Part of it comes from the brand leaning too heavily on the gimmick of cold activation. The entire identity shifted from flavor to temperature. When your slogan becomes the world's most refreshing beer, the focus moves away from grain quality and brewing craft. Layers of filtration get pushed harder to keep the beer light. Brewing cycles tighten to meet national demand. And the more a process speeds up, the easier it becomes for small flaws: metallic notes, can liner residue, uneven filtration to travel through untouched. Another piece comes from the supply chain. Large breweries depend on huge aluminum suppliers, and not all lining batches are perfect. Some slip. Some react differently under pressure. And when those cans spread across multiple states, any defect becomes inconsistent flavor in the real world. The question now is simple: can Coors Light get better again? The answer is yes, but only if they slow down long enough to notice what they've lost. Consistency used to define this brand. People knew exactly what they were getting. Lately, too many drinkers have been asking what changed, and some have already walked away. That's why I want to express a humble opinion here. A brand as established as Coors Light knows what real consistency looks like. They've held that reputation before, and they can claim it again, but only if they take this slide seriously. Otherwise, we may watch a once familiar favorite fade one cold can at a time. Sex Heineken? At first glance, Heineken still looks like the same premium promise it always made. The green bottle shines. The red star stands clean. The cap pops with that sharp metallic snap longtime drinkers know by heart. To most people, nothing about its appearance suggests anything has changed. But look closer, and especially taste closer, and the difference begins long before the bottle reaches your lips. Many American drinkers have reported sulfur-like skunky batches for years, a problem tied to Heineken's UV-sensitive green bottles, and the inconsistent results of regionally brewed US variants. It's not a dramatic scandal, it's not a headline. It's something much quieter, a slow shift in flavor that people only notice once they remember how Heineken used to taste. The moment you taste it, the drift becomes clear. The cap comes off and a sulfur edge rises through the neck, sharp, faintly rubbery, out of place for a beer marketed as crisp and clean. The first sip hits cold, almost too cold, numbing the tongue enough to hide the flaws beneath. But once the bottle warms even slightly, the real picture comes forward: a bitterness that spikes instead of spreading, an aroma that collapses instead of opening, and a skunky note hovering just long enough to make you wonder if the bottle sat under bright warehouse lights for too long. The finish thins out quickly, leaving a metallic flicker instead of the grain depth most drinkers expect. This isn't imagination. It isn't nitpicking. Online complaints build the same story, Reddit threads with hundreds of comments describing inconsistent Heineken, from state to state, people saying some six-packs taste normal, while others taste like light-damaged beer, and longtime fans confused by a creeping rubber smell or stale hop aroma. Once you read enough of these reactions, the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. Across the ocean, the contrast is almost startling. European Heineken tastes warmer, fuller, more rounded. The malt shows up immediately. The bitterness feels steady, never metallic. The aroma holds even after a few minutes, lifting from the glass with clean hop boils instead of collapsing into sulfur. Even the color feels different, deeper and softer, like a beer meant to be enjoyed instead of rushed. By comparison, what shows up in many US stores feels like a shadow of the original. What's behind that? The real issue sits deeper than taste. Heineken's US supply chain is scattered across multiple brewing partners, each with slightly different equipment water profiles, filtration steps, and freshness windows. Green bottles are notoriously vulnerable to UV exposure, and retail shelves are drenched in light from every angle. Shipping routes sprawl across the country, sometimes warm, sometimes cold, often long enough to degrade delicate hop compounds before the beer ever hits the fridge. And because the US market relies so heavily on contract breweries to meet demand, even small variations can multiply into entire regions, tasting different from others. The result is simple: a brand built on global prestige now feels unstable in the very market where it expanded the fastest. And drinkers feel it emotionally. They remember vacations abroad where the Heineken tasted richer. They remember nights when the bottle tasted cleaner, brighter, more reliable. Now they lift the cap and hesitate for half a second, waiting to see which version they're about to get. Is there a chance for Heineken to recover? Yes, absolutely. But only if they make real changes, shortening freshness windows, tightening contract brew protocols, protecting bottles from light, and maybe even retiring the green glass for the American shelf. Premium taste requires premium protection. Without it, even the best recipe fades. And that brings us to the clear truth. A brand built on global prestige shouldn't fade through its own bottling choices. Heineken knows exactly what its true flavor should be. If they care about their legacy in the United States, they need to protect that identity again, because no premium beer survives long on image alone. 7 Michelob Ultra. On the outside, Michelob Ultra still looks like the healthy drinker's beer. The silver white can, the slim typography, the images of runners, golfers, and cyclists in every commercial. It's a design built to make you feel lighter before you even open the tab. If you follow the ads, you'd think this is the beer for people who care more, who want something clean, without giving up their lifestyle. But once you taste it, the story shifts. For a product marketed as the better choice, Michelob Ultra has faced repeated criticism for tasting bland, metallic, or hollow, with many drinkers saying it feels more like flavored water than real beer. These claims didn't appear out of nowhere. They're the direct result of what the beer has slowly turned into. The moment you raise the can, the first sensory cue is the absence of almost no aroma at all. There's a faint cereal trace, but it fades so quickly it barely exists. The sip is cold, extremely cold, because the beer relies on temperature to hide what's missing. After the chill fades, the mouthfeel thins out like cold mineral water. The flavor breaks apart before it forms. And at the back of the tongue, a metallic flicker appears, quick, soft, but unmistakable, followed by a finish so short and empty it feels like the beer never fully arrived. And this isn't imagination. The internet is filled with the same phrases repeated thousands of times. No flavor whatsoever, like drinking sparkling water with a metal spoon. It feels engineered, not brewed. It used to taste better. What changed across regions, across reviews, across years? The tone is consistent. Ultra doesn't taste like beer, it tastes like the idea of beer. Meanwhile, real low-calorie beers don't have to taste empty. Some craft lagers manage to keep grain warmth, hop lift, and clean bitterness even at lower calorie counts. They have an aroma, they have shape. They don't disappear the moment they hit your tongue. By comparison, Michelob Ultra feels thinned down from the inside. Here's the hidden trade-off: to hit strict calorie targets, the formula loses more and more of what makes beer beer. Overfiltration removes the compounds that give body and aroma. Industrial brewing speeds flattened the rest. Clean became a code word for stripped, and healthy quietly drifted into hollow. If you want to see what that erosion feels like in real life, picture this. A man in his 40s walks in after a long day. He grabs a Michelob Ultra because it's what he's been buying for years, light, easy, familiar. He cracks the can open while scrolling on his phone. First sip, nothing. Second sip, still nothing. By the third sip, he pauses, then sets the can down and stares at it. Not angry, just tired. He shakes the can gently as if the flavor might be hiding at the bottom. He takes one more drink and the metallic edge shows up again, quick and sour. He exhales through his nose, remembers how it used to taste, and mutters under his breath, "Man, what happened to you?" Then he puts the can back in the fridge half full and walks away from it like someone finally giving up on a habit they didn't realize had already died. At this stage, one truth stands firm. A beer that built its name on health claims should honor taste, not erase it. Michelob Ultra once meant something simple and steady. It still could bud only if it stops leaning on the lifestyle image long enough to rediscover flavor. If nothing changes, the fade will continue quietly, one healthy can at a time. 8. How to choose good beer. After everything we've seen across 7 troubled brands, one truth rises to the surface. Good beer isn't an accident. It isn't luck. And it definitely isn't something you find by chasing the brightest label or the loudest commercial. Good beer follows patterns, quiet, consistent, reliable patterns, and once you recognize them, you'll never pick a bottle the same way again. By now, you've probably noticed something: every disappointing beer failed in predictable ways. Light damage thinning formulas, sloppy filtration, unstable storage shortcuts hidden under healthy or premium marketing. But here's the secret: those same patterns flipped around are exactly what point you toward the beers worth drinking. So instead of fearing the bad ones, let's use them to build a simple, practical guide that anyone can follow. Start with the packaging path. Glass bottles aren't all equal. Brown and amber bottles protect beer from light-keeping hops from breaking into that bitter, sulfur-like skunk smell. Green and clear bottles, no matter how iconic they look, offer little defense. Cans are even better, acting like a shield that blocks every ray of light and keeps the flavor intact. If you ever see beer stored under bright store lamps or near windows, skip it. Light doesn't care what brand it hits, it just ruins flavor. Good beer isn't afraid of darkness, it depends on it. Next is freshness. Real breweries print pack dates because they want you to know how close the beer is to its best moment. Poor quality brands rely on vague best before stamps or coded numbers you can't decipher. A simple rule is this: casual lagers and ales taste their best within 3 to 4 months of packaging. Once you know this window, you stop guessing. You stop reaching for dusty 6-packs with faded labels. You learn to look, not just grab. Then check the ingredients like a human, not a chemist. Simple as honest. Real beer needs only 4 things: water, barley, or wheat hops, and yeast. When you start seeing extras in natural flavor, beer-based corn, syrup blend adjunct grains, you're staring at shortcuts. They may lower costs, but they also lower flavor. If you pick up a can and the ingredient list feels like it belongs on a snack package, put it back. Good beer doesn't hide behind vocabulary. Finally, trust your senses, but learn what good signs feel like. Good beer has an aroma that exists and lasts. It doesn't vanish the moment the chill fades. It has a texture that isn't watery or metallic. Bitterness settles. It doesn't jab your tongue. The finish feels clean and whole, not chemical or hollow. Those are clues you can rely on even before you know the brewery's story. Once you put all of this together, something shifts. You stop drinking out of habit. You stop choosing based on what your friends grab. You stop believing that light, healthy, or premium means better. You start choosing based on honesty, the kind you can smell, sip, and feel. In the end, good beer isn't necessarily fancy, rare, or expensive. It's transparent. It respects the drinker enough to protect the process from grain to glass. And when you know exactly what to look for, you're not just avoiding the bad ones anymore. You're choosing flavor, craft, and truth every single time. Thank you for staying with me through this entire journey. Your patience, your curiosity, and your willingness to look a little deeper is what keeps honest beer alive. After 7 brands that stumbled and 2 that reminded us what real brewing can still taste like, one thing becomes clear: pure beer is worth protecting. That clean aroma, that steady bitterness, that quiet grain sweetness, they are not accidents. They come from care, time, and people who still believe beer should taste like beer. And that's something we shouldn't let slip away. Because in the end, preserving good beer isn't about nostalgia. It's about keeping honesty on the table.
This video does not promote division within the United States or encourage segregation. All content is presented for the purpose of exploration, analysis, and fostering discussion based on current events, public sentiment, and social trends. We fully respect the United States Constitution and all federal regulations. If today's analysis made you think, drop a comment so we can keep the conversations going. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you will never miss our next independent deep dive.